The Ink and Paint Club podcast is intended for mature audiences. I know we're usually talking about kids' cartoons and stuff, but there's going to be naughty language. Anyway, listener discretion is advised.
And then there's just like the fact that there's some really weird ass plots in the first generation. The episode was about like some weird goblin creature kidnapped a bunch of the like fillies and colts and was selling them into slavery.
I mean, like, it's just, they do that in real life, though.
I mean, I guess.
So really, when you put it into perspective, it's just kind of real life.
Ah, yes, you know, child abduction and child slavery.
Or horses.
You're listening to the Ink and Paint Club podcast, a proud member of the Geekly Grind Podcast Network.
Hey everyone, this is the Ink and Paint Club podcast. My name is Matt. I don't know where my co-hosts are. I think they might have gone undercover. JD and Kyle are not going to be on this episode, but Aiden was fortunate enough to be available, and he's going to be with me on this episode. Hi, Aiden.
Hey, it's good to be back again.
Yeah.
This time in the big chair.
Yeah. He's kind of sprawled out across JD, and he's kind of sprawled out across the desk, and he has his feet like in JD's chair and his head hanging into Kyle's chair. So he's
listen, I know it doesn't look very comfy, but this is really good for my back.
Yeah. Yeah. JD and Kyle were just a bit busy, so couldn't join us. But me and Aiden, we're gonna command this episode, and the topic of tonight's, depending on when you're listening to it, of this episode is we are talking about a movie called A Scanner Darkly, which is celebrating its 15th anniversary. Came out in 2006. Yeah, 15th anniversary.
Notable for starring a pre-Iron Man, but still post-rehab Robert Downey Jr.
Which is funny because it's in a movie entirely filled with drugs.
Oh God, yeah. Honestly though, like I had no fucking idea what this movie was. When you told me about this film, I was like, I have no idea what that is. And then I looked it up and I was like, oh, this is a film that stars Keanu Reeves, Woody Harrelson, Robert Downey Jr., and Winona Ryder. Count me in. I don't know what the fuck this is, but count me in. Yeah,
the cast list, especially now, is like definitely like it's an A-list cast. I mean, of course, you know, yeah, like you mentioned, like Robert Downey Jr. This was like post. Like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang was like his first like post rehab like kind of return to Hollywood, and then like in 2 years from Scanner Darkly coming out would be when he would do Iron Man. So that was his big ups. Woody Harrelson has always been kind of just a presence in Hollywood. Like he's always playing like really fun parts. Keanu Reeves, of course, the 2006, so Matrix trilogy would have wrapped up like 2 years before this, 3 years.
2000, really? Was it that long ago?
I feel like, yeah, because Matrix Reloaded and Revolutions came out or maybe it was 2002.
That was 2003.
2003, so yeah, 3 years.
Yeah, this is like post, like for Keanu Reeves is like post Matrix, but still a ways away from being John Wick. So yeah, it's really interesting, like seeing this cast in this movie all together and like knowing that they would eventually all become like huge A-list celebrities where like they're at a weird, it's a weird, interesting point in their career, which I guess is why they took on this weird kind of artsy, really surreal type of indie film. But yeah, I'm all for it. Definitely all for it.
And it's absolutely an indie film. I mean, even... Well, okay, yeah. So actually, I should just get like kind of into production stuff. So the movie's directed by Richard Linklater, mostly known as the director of the movies Slacker, Dazed and Confused, School of Rock. Maybe more infamously known nowadays for directing Boyhood, which took 12 years to make.
Oh God, this is that dude?
Yes.
Yikes! Oh God.
But listen, he also directed School of Rock. That movie's amazing. I love that movie.
I mean, everybody's got at least one good movie in them.
I've never watched Dazed and Confused. I attempted to watch Slacker when I was either in high school or just a little bit post high school, and it's one of the only movies that I've like fallen asleep trying to watch. It's just basically a lot of and I guess this is kind of typical of some of his other movies too, but like it's just a lot of fucking talking in that movie, which isn't to say that that's like a bad thing, but Slacker is like a very I think Slacker is cited as an influence on Kevin Smith to make Clerks, if I remember right.
That would actually not surprise me, because like this is definitely that kind of like, okay, so I'm coming at this from a really weird point of view where like now obviously it's an animated film, kind of. It's right. It's a rotoscope animated film, which is something you don't see very often, and I think there's a reason for it nowadays, which is like most of the time in rotoscope animation, like the stuff that you could do with it, most of the time you could just do it without the rotoscope element. But with this one, it's very bizarre. Like I think the best way I can describe it to anyone who hasn't seen it if you've ever watched any of Joel Haver's animated skits or like shorts, like the his RPG skits especially, it's kind of like that, but with more of a budget and with considerably less AI glitchiness.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so the rotoscope bit of it is absolutely, so yeah, that's the reason why we're covering it on this podcast in the first place. It is an animated movie, but it is rotoscope. So for anyone who doesn't know what rotoscoping is, it's they either filmed like the film on actual, like with actors on sets and everything, or they film like reference reference footage, and then they go back through in post basically, and they trace over it like in the style that they're doing. So for A Scanner Darkly, Richard Linklater shot the entire film, and it took, I think, 6 weeks. It took 6 weeks to film the movie, but it took 15 months to do the animation process on it.
I can see that.
Yeah, and I mean that's like factoring in like a ton of kind of drama as far as the production on it goes, because I think they didn't have very animators to start out with, and they eventually got they secured some extra budget to get more animators on, and I think the original animators they might have forced out because there was some stuff about like not remaining consistent with the artistic vision of Linklater or something. I don't know. It's kind of he said, she said, kind of stuff.
It's all about the he said, she said bullshit, as we say.
As Fred Durst would say, yes. And it's just like, I feel like now if they did try to do this movie now, it absolutely would be live action, just straight up, because we've come to a point now in movies where even for independent movies like this one is, you could convincingly do a lot of these effects without needing to animate the entire movie. I feel the decision to animate the entire movie is to accommodate certain sequences and plot elements in the story.
To me, I think that the rotoscope animation works both to compensate for various sequences and events that happen within the film, but also I think it works doubly in like fitting in with the thematic, or not thematic, the subject material and the themes of the movie, which are which I guess we should probably get into at least like what this movie is kind of about, because
right.
It's kind of hard to explain. I feel like it makes a little more sense to explain the visual element of it and how it works into the film with more context into what the film is actually about.
So Aiden, as somebody who just watched the movie for the very first time, tell me what the movie's about.
Okay, so Keanu Reeves, hang on a minute, I had this written down. So Keanu Reeves is playing a undercover narcotics officer and the thing about this movie is that all of the secret undercover narcotics officers are wearing these suits they call scramble suits, which like take various parts of just the human body and scramble and mesh and blend them all together to create this unwieldy fucking abomination that they're supposed to be like. It's impossible to detect who they are.
Yeah,
and it's a really cool, and like when you first see it, it's like a really cool visual effect, and I really dig it for the first like couple of minutes or for the first like half of the movie. But like by the end, by the third act of the film, it starts to get like actually eye straining. Like as I was watching the final like few scenes of the movie, I was actually starting to have a headache.
I feel like in that last like third of the movie though, it's definitely played up a lot more actively than it is in the rest of the movie, because it's meant to fit in with where the main characters, Keanu's character, Bob Arctor is at that point, as far as like, becoming too reliant on the drug.
So yeah, that's another thing. So Keanu Reeves' character is also secretly a drug junkie for this thing called, what do they call it? Just D?
Substance D.
Substance D, which is just some like crazy hallucinogenic narcotic, which I think is one of the reasons why I think the visual style of rotoscope animation works really well to the film thematically, even if it's somewhat of a strain to look at from time to time. Because especially during shots where there's a lot of camera movement, you'll see the background or you'll see things in the foreground like shift and like change in ways that don't look natural and are really bizarre. And it's just, I think it adds to the whole vibe of like experiencing this movie from the perspective of the characters who are constantly on this hallucinogenic drug that's just keeping them. I don't know what it does actually.
Well, especially in sequences involving one of the characters, Freck. All the scenes that involve him like are definitely played up for the effects like of the drug and everything. From everyone else's point of view, it's a pretty straightforward, just like they take the drug and they're just vibing basically. But Freck's the one that kind of becomes like paranoid from like overuse of it.
The movie fucking opens with this character Freck just covered in aphids. And the whole time I'm watching this, it's like, what the fuck is happening? But then after like 15 minutes or so, you realize it's like, oh wait, there were never any aphids. Oh, this dude's on some wacky shit.
Yeah, like he's talking with Barris, who's Robert Downey Jr.'s character in the film. He's talking with him over the phone, telling him like that his apartment's like covered in aphids, and so Barris tells him to collect some of them in a jar and then bring them to me so I can examine them and stuff. And then like he's driving with the jar, and then like by the time he gets to Arctor's house, like the jar's empty because of course there's nothing there because he's high. Like and then you get sequences like him in the house with Barris when he's like it's Robert Downey Jr.'s head like on a cockroach's body and like that's around and stuff.
That was another like I do wish that this movie got better use of its rotoscope animation, because I feel like with a lot of scenes like with the cockroach bit and like two of the big scenes with Freck, I think are like, that's a good use of the rotoscope animation to do something that you couldn't do on that kind of budget back in 2006.
Yeah.
But for me, the big problem is that like, as much as I really enjoy Keanu Reeves, Robert Downey Jr., and Woody Harrelson, all three of them are like doing great job. Like their acting work is great. They have surprisingly decent chemistry on set. A lot of this movie, just like a good chunk of, there's like 30 minutes or so where it's just the three of them just kind of chatting in a car or talking, and there's not really much use for the rotoscope animation to be used for. It's just kind of there.
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah, I would definitely agree. I feel like they could have absolutely used the medium to used it to its advantage more than it did. As far as all the stuff with the scramble suits and the scenes with Freck, like of course, like it's used wonderfully there. But I feel like they could have at least used it a bit more as Arctur's kind of taking his descent as is getting more and more into the drug and everything. I feel like they could have done a lot more as far as him, experiencing, not exactly the same type of stuff that Freck's experiencing, because, it's all relative to the person. But, like they do that only really when, like, in that last part of the movie when, like, he's starting to exhibit, brain damage and stuff from it, and he's starting to see the scramble suits, become more active, and, he's starting to see, like, some hallucinations there and everything. But I feel like, yeah, they could have absolutely sprinkled a bit more in here and there, because like I mentioned, if they had done the movie now, they could have absolutely done all of the visual effects as far as the stuff that affects Freck and the scramble suits and stuff. They could just do that with visual effects now on top of live action footage, and it would probably get the same effect across as this has.
Yeah, definitely. Although I will say one other like good sequence I was really surprised with was one of the first real moments of Keanu Reeves' character like descending into the drug infused madness. Is there's a bit where he's like having remembering like his old family, where he had a family.
Monologue.
Yeah, his whole monologue with his family and stuff like that.
Yeah,
and the way that like the way they use the sequence, like the way it's shot and directed. And like you see like just this happy little house with the somewhat happy looking house with like his wife, his two girls, and then it later shifts into just like the house, but now it's a wreck. You can see like big stains of red on the walls and on one of the chairs, and it's like, ooh, that's like, I think a good little like use of the medium. Both really, that's just a good shot in general. I think that's just a good sequence in general for the film,
and a really good monologue from Keanu's like got some really good dramatic work in this movie.
Oh, absolutely! Like Keanu Reeves is firing off on all cylinders in this movie. Like he's doing an amazing job with it. Yeah, Woody Harrelson gives about the performance you'd expect from Woody Harrelson if you've seen him in like Zombieland, for example.
Yeah,
it's a slightly different character, obviously, but it's still Woody Harrelson, and he's still like a blast to watch whenever he's on screen.
Yeah, and then fucking Robert Downey Jr. just plays he's so hateable in this movie.
He plays the hateable douchebag, but he's not. He basically is just, he's really good at playing the hateable douchebag, and that's what he's doing here. Like all of the actors I feel like are playing up to their strengths, including Winona Ryder, who I keep forgetting is in this movie because like a good chunk of her screen time is like relegated to like only a bit of the third act.
Yeah, she plays really importantly to the actual underlying plot of the movie that kind of comes to the surface by the end of the movie, but they sprinkle in little hints throughout the movie that kind of all add up at the end, and she's like kind of a key to the whole thing. And so yeah, she gets a lot of like good moments like at the end of the movie, but as far as like the first 2/3, she's kind of just there as kind of like a somebody for Arctur to kind of, or Keanu Reeves' character to sort of bounce off of.
Yeah, but it's still solid performance from Winona Ryder.
Yeah, absolutely. As far as Freck goes, because he does a great job portraying that character too. Rory Cochrane.
Yeah, Rory Cochrane is.
I don't believe I've seen him in anything else. I know that he's been in other things, but this is the only movie that I think I've seen him in. But
it's worth pointing out in my notes because I've never seen I don't recognize Rory Cochrane. But it's worth pointing out that like I mentioned in my notes that he feels way more animated than the other characters in this movie, and I think that's just like more. I don't know if that's down to the like good physical performance of Roy Cochran, or if they just like maybe hammed up the animation a bit more to emphasize that he's more far gone than anyone else is.
I would believe that he just he was able to embody that character that well. Like, I imagine they didn't have to embellish anything in animation. I feel like, he was able to just portray it like that expertly.
Yeah, I mean, I believe it.
The one other scene that because I'd mentioned some of his other scenes before, but one of the other highlights of the movie involves him where after an experience with all the other characters, he goes home and just willy-nilly decides to commit suicide, and he spends a lot more time deciding on like how the tableau of his death is going to look more than the time that he spent deciding that he was going to kill himself, where he's trying to pick out a good suit and a fine wine and a nice book to die to, and he's just laying in bed, and he's gulped down all these pills and drinking this wine, and like he's instead of dying, he's falling under hallucinations of this man in a suit, this yellow man in a suit that has a billion eyeballs, and he's reading him his sins for eternity.
God, that was such a great scene. I was like, that's another one of those great examples of like it was a good moment of like catching the viewer off guard, and also just a good use of the rotoscope animation, because like that's the kind of a visual effect you couldn't do with a budget of like $7.7 million.
Yeah. Another interesting thing to note too is that that's the only point of the movie where anything has a narrator. Is just in that scene. There's from what I've read, apparently that whole passage that's narrating during that scene is apparently taken straight from the book that the movie's based on.
I had a feeling this movie was based on something.
Right, so I'll tell you a little bit about that. There was originally a recording of the author reading that passage that they wanted to use in the movie, but apparently the audio quality of it was not so great, so they ended up going with somebody else to do the narration on that. But yeah, so let's talk about the author for a little bit. Does the name Philip K. Dick ring any bells?
Vaguely, but I only think vaguely because I saw his name at the end of the movie.
Right. Well, if you've seen the movies Minority Report, Total Recall, or Blade Runner, then you have him to thank for that, because those are all based on his works.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
See, I have not seen Blade Runner yet, but I will probably do it at some point. I have seen Total Recall, though.
Which one?
The first one, the original one.
The Schwarzenegger one.
Yeah.
Good man. Okay. That's it's one of my favorite it's one of my favorite movies. One of my favorite sci-fi movies, one of my favorite Schwarzenegger movies. It's great.
Yeah.
As far as if any of these movies are, faithful to their inspiration, I can't personally attest to. I haven't read any of Philip K. Dick's novels. I've heard that Scanner Darkly is probably the closest an adaptation has gotten to. A lot of these other ones, like with Blade Runner and these other ones, they tend to take elements and then they, whoever the director is on those, Paul Verhoeven on Total Recall, and then Ridley Scott on Blade Runner. Kind of just take elements and then kind of just repurpose them for what it amounts to being like an original story.
Yeah.
I don't even know if the version of Total Recall that they made with Colin Farrell is closer to the original novel or the story that's based on, but who's to say?
That's pretty reasonable for these kinds of like movies that are like based off of novelizations like these. There's naturally a lot of them are just going to take elements from the story without adapting the novel entirely one for one.
Yeah, definitely. Do you know who Terry Gilliam is?
The name definitely sounds familiar.
So Terry Gilliam was a member of Monty Python.
Oh, okay.
And also a film director. And I'm not sure if you've have Have you ever seen like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas or
okay,
Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, Brothers Grimm?
I have not watched Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, but despite the fact that I have not watched it, that was one of the movies I put down as like movies that this feels like to me.
Yeah, so that's another movie that I watched. Like, I watched Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas for the first time, probably right around the same time I watched A Scanner Darkly. And they definitely do share some, because, you know, having both movies to do with like drugs and stuff, they do share like some sort of visual DNA in that regard, I guess. Of course, they're both the way that they approach that's different, but it's definitely a connecting theme. But anyway, the reason why I brought up Terry Gilliam at all is apparently he was originally trying to get a version of A Scanner Darkly made in the 90s, but it didn't end up happening. So,
I could see how I could definitely see how this kind of story would have resonated with him. And I'm a little disappointed that we didn't get that version of the film. But I think the version of the film we have is still pretty close to what I feel like that Terry Gilliam would have done in terms of like direction.
Yeah.
Because I have seen the Brothers Grimm at least once. I only vaguely remember a bit of it. Wait, is this the movie? Okay, correct me if I'm wrong, but does the Brothers Grimm have a sequence where a horse eats like a little girl? Okay, good. I have seen that movie. That scene has traumatized me forever.
Right. Yeah, and I think that was also like one of I think that was one of Heath Ledger's like later projects, as well as Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus. I think that was actually his last movie, and that was one where they were in the middle of filming when he died. So they that was why they ended up. Are you familiar with that movie at all?
No, not familiar with that one.
So in that movie, I've seen it once, like when it came out. I can't remember exactly what the plot is, but it's a fantastical movie. Heath Ledger's character, I'm not sure if it's like dimension hopping or whatever, but anyway, when Heath Ledger died, they basically retooled the movie to work where Heath Ledger's character got played by other actors in other scenes. So Heath Ledger, you know, for the beginning of the movie, and then he eventually turns into Johnny Depp, Jude Law, and Colin Farrell throughout the course of the movie.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I have never seen this movie, but it sounds fascinating.
I mostly remember this movie for being the one thing that I saw Andrew Garfield in before he became Spider-Man.
Nice.
Because I think that was the last movie he did before he was able to do those two movies. And I think I watched that. I was just really interested to see how his portrayal of Peter Parker was going to be. So that was why I wanted to check out that movie. Well, and plus, you know, everyone was high on Heath Ledger after Dark Knight. So anyone wanted to see anything that had him in it.
Yeah, definitely.
Jeremy Snow here, owner and editor-in-chief of The Geekly Grind. I'm interrupting your awesome, regularly scheduled programming to ensure that you know about our Geekly Grind podcast network, of which this show is a treasured member of. If you haven't had a chance to check out our site, you can do so at www.thegeeklygrind.com, and while you're there, check out the other members of our steadily growing podcast family, including the anime-centric Blake and Spencer Get Jumped, discovering new heroes and comic book keepers with Chris and Lance, exploring the vast universe of geekdom with Geeksploration, or of course appreciating animation's finer details with the Ink and Paint Club. Escape your weekly grind at The Geekly Grind.
What did you think of the soundtrack of the movie?
I did not really notice the soundtrack, to be honest.
Okay.
Like, this was one of those weird cases where, like, I was watching the movie and I was paying attention, but I was paying more attention to things like the dialogue and the performances of the actors, as well as any kind of like visual elements of it. I wasn't really paying attention to things like the soundtrack or anything. Because, like, one of the things I wrote down on my notes is one of the more surprising cameo appearances in this movie is from, of all fucking people, Alex Jones, who makes a small cameo appearance in this movie.
Yes. Apparently he had also made a cameo in either an earlier or a later Richard Linklater movie as well. So he's shown up multiple times in his movies.
Huh.
Yeah. I think usually playing like street profit nut jobs, kind of like how Alex Jones is in real
Alex
life.
Jones playing himself.
Pretty much. But anyway, the music's done by Graham Reynolds. And I feel like he does a really good job of kind of accentuating the themes of the movie. Like a lot of the stuff like with Freck is like kind of manic and stuff. And then there's some really beautiful like orchestral work in this movie. Like I remember when I watched this movie originally when it came out, like I think there's that song that plays like right before the credits roll, like after the last scene in the movie, was like, I think it was one of the first pieces of music that actually made me like tear up. And I think that was because of like the sort of like what the scene it was playing over and everything, especially because it's playing over. And I found this out later. That list of people that they do at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Of like all the people that died or suffered some permanent. That was all from the book, and that was all people that Philip K. Dick actually knew. Those were all real people.
Damn.
He actually lists himself on there too. There's like, I think he lists like Philip permanent pancreatic damage or something like that, along with the list. But yeah, that's all people that, because like a lot of Scanner Darkly is apparently based on real experiences that Philip K. Dick had. Of course, none of the sort of like drug operations or any of that sort of stuff. More like the stuff on the side of like Arthur and like his friends and like the experiences that they're going through and stuff. Apparently, that was all based on real things that happened with Philip K. Dick.
I believe that the scene, like those were probably my favorite sequences in the whole movie. Like they dragged on a bit, but I felt like just the there was a real like honest chemistry between the three, and knowing that this was from like experiences that the writer had like experienced in his life, it makes a lot of sense. This definitely, like, okay, I hang out with a lot of people. I hang out with a couple of people who do mild drugs. I won't say anything, but like, yeah, it definitely came off with the same kind of vibe of like just relaxing and just chilling and talking with your friends while you're getting high.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it seemed very genuine.
Legally, just want to stress legally.
I'm not sure if any of the stuff in the movie, like making a homemade silencer for a gun, or getting into a fight where one person has a hammer and one has a rock, or somebody letting the other choke to death while they just casually call 911 or anything. I'm not sure if any of that stuff happened. I want to say that rewatching the movie now, and I rewatched the movie twice for this show just because I watched it 2 weeks ago with a friend, and then I watched it just before this recording because I wanted it fresh in my mind. So I've seen the movie 3 times now. And it's definitely made me want to check out the book because I would love to see exactly like what it's adapted from. The book actually came out in, I think, 1977. Yeah, 1977, and the movie the book takes place in what would have been the future of 1994. So of course, when they did the movie in 2006, they it takes place in the future of like. Of this movie, so it would have been like probably right around now, like 2021 or something.
Around this point, yeah.
Because that's the kind of stuff where you have to like kind of think about the technology and stuff, and kind of like they always try to, with this type of stuff, they always try to put the movie just far enough in the future where it seems like technology like this could exist, but not too far off where you're wondering like where are the flying cars or anything like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Although, I mean, I don't know if like how a scramble suit would work in real life. That feels like the kind of thing where I guess maybe through holograms. I don't know. But like it's definitely, yeah, I didn't really notice it that much. I don't know. I feel this is a very interesting film to talk about for me because I feel more out of my element than I usually do. Right. Because this is not the kind of film I usually watch and talk about to like a really complex degree, let alone on a podcast. So right. I'm having a difficult time trying to like evaluate my thoughts about it. I can at least say that I enjoyed the film. I think it's good. I think it's a solid film. I think it's definitely one of those that you have to go in with the sort of mindset of watching of what to expect from it, because I went in with no concept of what to expect from it, and I came out feeling like I enjoyed the film, but I wasn't sure what I was really feeling about it.
I get you.
It's very like I'm having a hard time explaining, but yeah.
I think I get what you're talking about. Yeah, it's definitely a type of film that is it makes you feel complex things, because it's, there's the whole rhetoric about, drugs bad and everything, but like there's a very realness to like how drugs do affect people like this, and kind of, any movie that kind of just portrays it as being, like this sort of, this real, and like how it affects people. And yeah, I don't know, it's just like, typically I don't tend to watch like a ton of dramas really, but like, and it was weird, like I when I originally watched this movie, when it came out, I must have been, I was 14 when it came out, and so I think I was more drawn into the fact, because when they were advertising this movie, they were mostly using the shots of like the scramble suits and the scenes with Freck and stuff, because that was like the most visually interesting stuff. You can't just sell a movie on just like, people talking.
Well, yeah, obviously.
So of course, 14-year-old me like seeing all this stuff like in Rotoscope, and I think this is the very first Rotoscope movie I ever seen too. I believe this was before I discovered like Ralph Bakshi or any of his works or anything like that. We should really talk about Cruel World on this podcast sometime.
God, hell yeah! You'll need to get on Cool World at some point.
We're gonna cover Wizards before we ever cover Cruel World, if I have my say in it, because that was the first movie I ever saw his. And that I think that's either pre or just post Star Wars, because as Mark Hamill is one of the voice roles in that movie. One of his first voice roles, I think. But yeah, so just the fact that it was an animation style I'd never seen before, it being rotoscoped and all this like visual wonder, and then eventually watching the movie when it came out on DVD, and just like, I guess not being able to really parse like a lot of like the plot and everything. And mostly just like kind of enamored with how it looked. And yeah, like I definitely have a better appreciation for it now, having rewatched it now twice. And just kind of, basically like, and this is definitely spoilers, even though we've been kind of talking about scenes of the movie throughout, but the whole movie has to deal with, this sort of like, Keanu Reeves' character being undercover, but also slowly kind of succumbing to the effects of this drug. And basically what this leads up to is, throughout the movie, he's being led subliminally to remember blue flowers and picking them and bringing them and that sort of thing, because by the end of the...
Okay, I'm gonna sound really stupid for this, but I'll be honest. I may have missed something, because I think the blue flowers kind of came out of nowhere for me.
There's bits in the movie where, when he is being evaluated by the medical professionals at his job, and he's talking about like, how he was like getting into arguments with like Winona Ryder's character, Donna. And one of the medical professionals there telling him like, oh no, you should bring her some blue flowers or something like that, to that effect.
Huh.
Yeah, like I said, it's all just sort of like, if you're watching the movie for the first time, you might not immediately put it together. But since I now watched the movie twice, like, it's kind of all falls together.
Speaking as a first time watcher, the stuff about the blue flowers at the ending, while it still I think the ending still had the same impact that I think it was that the writer and director intended it to have for me. It was definitely not something I was noticing subliminally, but also, I don't know, maybe I'm just stupid. I didn't catch any real like hints towards blue flowers.
I feel like if you rewatch the movie, you'll definitely pick up on that stuff now. I think even without me having mentioned it and having seen the ending of the movie, I feel like you'd be like, oh, huh, yeah, well, anyway, yeah, so getting back to that, basically what's revealed in this movie is that the agents who Winona Ryder's character is revealed to be one of, are convinced that... I'm gonna forget the name of the company. It was like New Something.
Yeah, there was like they only brought it up like a few times in the
New Path.
Yeah.
So New Path is like one of the leading sort of drug rehab centers in the world, and it's revealed that the flower that is used in the creation of Substance D is grown on the premises of New Path, like on one of their farms, basically. But the only way to access those farms is, or I guess the only people that they allow access to the farms are people who are going through rehab that are so burnt out that they can't possibly reveal them, that sort of thing. So by the end of the movie, Keanu Reeves is like completely burned out, and they say like he has like 2 functioning brain cells. Basically, he's basically he's out of it. He can't make heads or tails with stuff. Like he's given
so out of it. He's so out of it. He's not only given commands; they like give him a new name and a new identity, basically throughout the film. Well, throughout the ending, and it's. Yeah, I kind of had the feeling that even though I didn't know what the blue flowers were in terms of like subliminally, I had a feeling of like, oh, this must be what they use to make the drug. And then of course the fucking old dude with the business suit comes up and starts talking. And it's like, oh yeah, that is the point of it. Wow, that's fucked up.
Yeah, well, the thing they kind of dwell on as being the most fucked up part of it is that Winona Ryder's character is in that group of friends, and so she's been manipulating him the entire time to basically burn him out on the drug to get him sent to the farms, while also influencing him subliminally to look out for what they're trying to find as evidence to expose New Path. And it's just one of those things where it's just like, man, that's heavy, like to basically ruin somebody.
Yeah, no, that's the first I'm hearing of like, okay, I don't know how much of this movie went over my head, but clearly a lot of it went over my head, because that's the first I'm hearing of it, and like, wow, yeah, that's fucked.
Yeah.
That's fucked.
It is. Oh man, yeah. It just, I remember like even when I watched this when I was 14, and just the just seeing Keanu like acting like that, like it made me I didn't feel good. Like I know.
No, this is definitely a downer ending.
It's a downer of an ending. Like the last movies I had seen him in were the Matrix trilogy. I'm just like, oh man, awesome, Neo, Keanu. I'm just like, this movie, I'm just like, oh man, that sucks. Like even back then I knew it sucked, but I didn't know exactly for all the reasons that I realize now. It's like, yeah, it becomes a sad movie. It's most of the movie is played, I would say like half and half. It's played comedically between like, the groups of friends and stuff, and then it's played, dramatically with just the stuff with Keanu and Winona, and the stuff with like the company that it works for.
Yeah, like there's a good balance between like when it's played for laughs and when it's like played up for drama, and when it's an overall like very balanced type of deal.
Yeah. And yeah, man, it's unfortunate because I mean, yeah, with a budget of 8.7 million in the box office, they only made back 7.7 million. So
God, 1 million off. That's rough.
I mean, I have to imagine by now, like, on home media and everything, they must have made some money back. 'Cause, I mean, this is absolutely have to, like, I can't personally test to it, but like, this seems like one of those cult classic movies, like the types that would get shown like, at midnight, like in LA or something.
I could definitely see this at like an LA or like even just like a late night sort of time. What's the word I'm looking for? At sort of a late night theater showing where they show like weird cult films and like shit that nobody like thinks to watch unless you already like know your stuff, your film making, and you're like your weird obscure movies. Like if there's anything about this movie I could say the most certainly of all, I can definitely add this to my list of like indie animated movie cred, because yeah,
totally. Well, and actually, so this is something I totally forgot to mention when we're talking about Linklater's work, was that in addition to those other movies that I listed, he had done a movie 5 years prior to this one in 2001 called Waking Life, which is also another rotoscoped animated movie.
Really?
Yeah, I believe that one's more like stuff like Slack or whatever, where it's just like a bunch of scenes of people talking, sort of like. I feel like they probably get like more experiment. Like, I've seen the trailer for it. I haven't watched the movie, but I've seen the trailer, and it seems like for the animation techniques, they kind of get a bit more experimental with that because it's mostly just people having conversations and stuff. Like I don't know the plot of the movie, but just from what I've seen in the trailer, that's what it seems like to me. That might be something we'll cover at some point. I think that's also celebrating. Well, yeah, 2001. It'd be celebrating 20th anniversary this year. So yeah, maybe we'll cover it. I don't know. Who's to say?
Who's to say? Maybe if I come back for that one, I'll have a better like frame of reference to talk about it with.
Sure. we'll visit back with you and we can see if you've revisited Scanner and if you have a better understanding of the movie too. Since then, we'll have like a little we'll revisit for you.
Yeah.
Earlier when I was bringing up the soundtrack, that was actually leading to a separate thing. Was that there's 4 licensed tracks in the movie from Tom York and Radiohead. It's mostly apparent on the end credits, and I believe there's just other tracks of theirs sprinkled throughout. But apparently they did a cut of the movie that was entirely scored. Like it wasn't scored by Radiohead, but the soundtrack of the movie was tracks from Radiohead.
Huh.
And that was apparently it was an early test screenings or that, and I very much want to find out what songs and in what scenes, or if there's just a cut of the movie out there that is that, because I would love to see like if that changed. Like, you know, like I said, I like the score that is there, but I mean like a movie entirely like, you know, with the soundtrack done by Radiohead. I mean, that's definitely an interesting thought to me because it kind of reminded me of like I don't know, or the idea of watching this movie now with a different soundtrack where it's just Radiohead tracks. It's kind of like, you know, have you ever heard that old thing where if you watch Wizard of Oz with the Pink Floyd, you know, Dark Side of the Moon, you know, if it lines up and everything, like obviously this would have been, you know, tracks picked in mind with all that stuff, but you know, it's still kind of the same feeling to it.
I could definitely like that might explain another reason why while I enjoyed this film, it did not click with me a whole lot because, okay, I'm probably going to get my music nerd license taken away from it. I don't care for Radiohead. So I did not notice it whatsoever. Like I didn't notice any of Tom York's songs in this movie, mostly because I just simply don't care for Radiohead.
I haven't listened to the majority of their work. I've listened to everything before I think Kid A came out after OK Computer. Either way, so
yeah.
Yeah, so I've listened to everything before that. So I've listened to Pablo Honey and was it the Bends and but any of those. And so yeah, I've never gotten into sort of like any of the albums that came much later that they've kind of that Radiohead's built like their current existing fan base around. So I have no, you know, idea of how, like, you know, I guess I'm gonna lose my music credit on this too. I mean, that's not to say I don't enjoy what I've heard. Like, I think OK Computer and Kid A are some really good albums. I actually really do enjoy the Bends. I think that's a really good album. But anyway, yeah. So I thought that was an interesting note that I definitely wanted to. I almost forgot to throw that one out there.
Yeah.
But yeah, this movie it's very interesting. It's absolutely worth a watch. Even if, you know, if you're not familiar with the Linklaters' other work, or if you just really like, you know, Keanu or, you know, Robert Downey Jr., Woody, or, you know, Winona Ryder.
I'd say if you're a big fan of any of the actors that we've talked about today, you should definitely give this film a watch because, like, yeah, they're firing on all cylinders with this film. They pull out some very great performances. Keanu Reeves, especially, just like all around, just great performances. You mentioned the few monologues he has in this they're fantastic.
Yeah, no,
like,
they're great.
Overall, like, yeah.
As coming from somebody that like proclaims himself as a very big Keanu fan, I've only ever really seen him in this, the Matrix trilogy, the John Wick trilogy, the Bill and Ted trilogy. So
he has a lot of trilogies.
Well, I mean, Bill and Ted only became a trilogy like last year.
I mean, that still counts.
It was duology for a long time, but anyway, yeah. So, yeah. Did you have anything else that you wanted to mention?
I don't really have much else to say on this film. It was definitely an experience, one that I will likely go back to with a bit more knowledge going in, and maybe my opinion of it will change. Maybe the blue flowers will hit a lot harder for me the second time. But for now, I enjoyed it, but it is not a movie I would really go back to like frequently, or it's not one of my favorite movies, is what I'm trying to get at.
That's fair.
It's definitely a solid like piece of cinema. And I definitely would recommend it to anyone who, especially if you're interested in any of the writers' other works. Like, I have a friend who's a big fan of Blade Runner. I'm definitely going to recommend this movie to him.
Sure. Yeah, if you're a fan of the director's previous work, if you're a fan of any of the actors in this movie, if you're a fan of the author of the original book, if you are a fan of Rotoscope, or you've never seen a Rotoscope movie before, this is definitely like a good example of one. Yeah, for a variety of factors, this is definitely a recommendation from me. And yeah, I guess that's all there is to be said about Scanner Darkly. I definitely want to read the novel now, so I'll hopefully try to make some time to do that sometime this year. But yeah, that was Scanner Darkly. Aiden, thank you again for coming on.
Hey, don't mention it.
I'm so very glad I didn't need to end up doing this. I dread the day where I'll have to do an episode by myself, but luckily this is not that day. So yeah, hopefully we'll have JD and Kyle, or some combination of those two, back on the show again soon. Then yeah, we will see you next week for another episode. And until then, have a good night, have a good morning whenever you listen to this. We will see you next time.
Later.
Thanks for listening. You can find all the links to our social media pages in the episode description. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and join our Discord. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. The Ink and Paint Club is happy to be part of the Geekly Grind Podcast Network. We'll see you next time.